In the summer of 1963, two gangs of criminals got together to stop the Glasgow to London travelling post office. They planned to uncouple the carriages carrying high-value packages and transfer the sacks to waiting vehicles. On the night of the 2nd of August, the Up Special Express consisted of a diesel engine and 12 coaches, all filled with mail and the men sorting it. The high-value coach contained 128 bags filled with banknotes, an unusually large amount due to August Bank holiday. What happened next made headlines all over the world. The plan was simple in outline, complicated in practice. As the train approached the end of its journey and had passed the town of Leighton Buzzard, about half an hour from London, the signal at Sears Crossing would be rigged to halt it. Once the crew were overpowered, the gang's own driver would take it to men waiting at Bredigo Bridge. The train was to be stopped by placing a glove over the green light and rigging up a battery-powered red bulb next to it. It all worked mechanically, but there were human problems. The fireman, David Whitby, jumped down to find out why they had been stopped. He was pushed down the embankment and told by a man with a kosh, "If you shout, I'll kill you." Allowed back in the cab, the fireman found his driver, Jack Mills, on his knees, his head bleeding. It was full of men with balaclava helmets masking their faces. The gang discovered that their so-called expert was unable to move the engine and the uncoupled carriages, so they forced the wounded driver Mills to do it for them. The engine and coaches crept along to Bredigo Bridge. Waiting there were men in army uniform and a truck painted like an army vehicle. Later, Fireman Whitby was able to tip the police off to the military disguise. At the bridge, the windows of the high-value package coach were smashed and the sorters overpowered. The gang allowed themselves only a strict 15 minutes and left 8 bags behind rather than delay. They handcuffed the driver and fireman and warned them to keep quiet for half an hour. Their haul was 120 mail bags containing over £2.5 million in used banknotes. The alarm was eventually given by the guard from the stranded train, and by 6 a.m. investigators were climbing the signal gantry to discover how it had been rigged. Scotland Yard was immediately called in, but could find no direct clues to the robbers. Every surface was tested for fingerprints, but curious children had clambered in and spoiled most of the forensic chances. In any case, the thieves were clearly professionals and had been super careful. The best lead was given by the warning to keep quiet for half an hour. That suggested that the gang had a hideout somewhere within a half-hour radius of the crime. The driver of the train, Jack Mills, had been badly hurt by his beating and couldn't identify his assailants. While detectives scoured the train and the surrounding area for the slightest of clues, Scotland Yard put out an announcement that the police were undertaking a search of every building within a 30-mile radius of the spot. They were going to investigate every possible hiding place to which the vehicles might have driven from the bridge. The ulterior motive for this unusual publicity of their methods was to try and panic the robbers into a premature departure, and this turned out to be a successful ploy. The thieves abandoned their hideaway before they had planned to, and took off with the loot for London. Buckinghamshire police, based in Aylesbury, started methodically searching the countryside. Their investigations ranged from the outbuildings of Lord Rosebery's nearby country house, Mentmore Park, to haystacks in fields. In London, every known informer was being questioned, and their information confirmed Scotland Yard's hunch that a London gang was responsible for a haul now known to be over £2.5 million. On Monday the 12th of August, word came that a farm labourer had reported that a farm near the village of Oakley had been abandoned, and that there was an army truck in a shed. At first the police had filed away this report with the other 400 a day they were getting, but when he urgently phoned again, a constable was sent to have a look at Leatherslade Farm. He climbed in a window and went down to the cellar, where he saw a heap of post office mailbags and torn-up wrappers with the names of banks. He had found the hideout. The windows had been blacked out, and when the squad he summoned broke into the garage, there were 2 Land Rovers, both with the same number plates. In front of the house they saw the ash of a bonfire and a half-dug hole. Inside there were stacks of abandoned supplies, and despite wearing gloves most of the time, the gang had left enough fingerprints and palm prints to work on. Although they had carried out the operational side with military precision, they had made the mistake of relaxing at their headquarters. They had also failed to make watertight arrangements for cleaning it up afterwards, and it was this oversight that was to land them in jail. The local police were warned by the head of their CID, Malcolm Futrell, to be careful about touching anything. "This place is one big clue," he said. The first arrests came in Bournemouth on the 14th of August. A policeman's widow who lived here had a lock-up garage to let. She was suspicious when 2 men produced a large wad of notes to pay her for 3 months in advance. While they were putting their van in, she phoned the police. 2 detectives came to the garage and the men panicked and ran off. Tackled and brought down, they were taken to the local police station, where their cars were given a thorough search. And although they insisted at first that they were just innocent holidaymakers, they quickly caved in when faced with an incriminating pile of money found in the van. It was a share of the loot, totalling £78,982. The police had caught Roger Caudray, who had long been pilfering from the mailbags on the Brighton to London line. He didn't argue and pleaded guilty at the subsequent trial. The second man was a friend of Caudray's, Bill Bowl, recruited to help him hide the cash while pretending to be on holiday. They were taken to Aylesbury and brought before the magistrates' court there. When Bowl realized that Caudray's brother-in-law Alfred Pilgrim was also to be charged with receiving stolen money, along with his own wife Renee and Caudray's sister Maisie, he lost his cool completely and readily admitted his involvement. Two days later, on the 16th of August, 4 suitcases containing over £100,000 were found in a Surrey wood. There was also a receipt, which led to a solicitor's clerk named Brian Field, who had handled the purchase of Leatherslade Farm. The vehicles found there were taken for tests. Forensic scientists found traces of a distinctive yellow paint on the pedals. Alerted by the fingerprints, the police published the photograph of a known villain named Buster Edwards. Another, Charlie Wilson, went missing with his girlfriend, Mary Manson. The prints of the suspected gang leader, Bruce Reynolds, had also been found at Leatherslade Farm. Those of another man, Jimmy White, had been discovered in a caravan near the Surrey wood where money had earlier been found. When police prized off its panelling, they unearthed over £30,000. Charlie Wilson was quickly picked up at his house in Clapham. Publication of the names caused a rift among the investigating officers. Some of them thought it had been done just to show the public they were on the job and would scare the uncaught suspects into hiding. But Mary Manson gave herself up. Although the police were pretty certain she had been at Leatherslade Farm, they couldn't prove it, and she was only charged with receiving the £820 she had paid for a car on the robbers' behalf. After 6 weeks, she was released on bail. The man in charge of the hunt was Tommy Butler. who insisted that those arrested should be kept hidden from the cameras until the necessary identifications had been made. Butler reckoned he knew every criminal with the professional experience to pull off a job as big as this. Among the men he was keen to talk to were a silversmith, Roy James, who was addicted to motor racing, and an Irish antique dealer, John Daly. His wife was the sister of Bruce Reynolds. The police discovered that Daly had briefly stayed at the Endcliffe Hotel in Margate with his pregnant wife, Barbara. Fingerprint experts were immediately called in. What they were looking for was a palm print to match one found on the bathroom wall at the farm. On the 3rd of December, an underworld tip-off led Butler to Daly's hideout in London's Eaton Square, and he arrested him. The next arrest was of Putney hairdresser Gordon Goody. He was found to have yellow paint from the van's pedals on his shoes. Over the next few weeks, the police brought in a whole series of other suspects. These included Ronnie Biggs, James Hussey, Leonard Field, Thomas Wisby, Brian Field, and John Denby Wheater. A major prize for Butler was Roy James, nicknamed the Weasel by the press. 40 policemen came for him at his hideout in Ryder's Terrace, St John's Wood. James grabbed a leather bag with £12,000 in it and ran along the roofs of the terrace. But as he jumped to the ground, he found himself faced with a detective. He claimed the bag was nothing to do with it. On the same day, John Daly was captured, and both men were bundled off to Aylesbury to be charged. The money was still turning up. In a telephone box in Great Dover Street in South London, just under £50,000 more was discovered. It had been planted there in a deal between the police and an underworld contact of Buster Edwards, who had been entrusted with it. On the 20th of January 1964, the trial began of those so far caught and accused of involvement in the great train robbery. Elaborate arrangements had been taken to prevent escapes, including decoy Black Marias emerging from the prison, which were, in fact, empty. "1,700 exhibits had been prepared for presentation in court. 2,350 written statements had been taken from witnesses. The quiet market town of Aylesbury had never known such excitement. Afraid that a London jury at the Old Bailey might be too easily nobbled by these powerful underworld figures, the Crown had decided to adapt Aylesbury's council chamber for the purpose. Special facilities were provided for journalists who arrived from all over the world. There was a total of 40 barristers, the prisoners sharing 9 eminent Queen's Counsel, each with his juniors. They were ranged against 2 QCs and their juniors for the prosecution. All the accused except Caudry pleaded not guilty to the charge of conspiracy to rob the mail. The prosecution took 3 weeks to present its 200 witnesses, each adding to the picture of a large gang of desperate men determined to get their hands on a fortune. It was all a wonderful free spectacle for the people of Aylesbury. In the courtroom, a web was being woven around the accused, which justified the millions of pounds being spent on the prosecution and the 120 officers it had taken to bring 200 witnesses to court. But outside, as the days turned into weeks and months, press coverage tailed off, and they got used to seeing Mr. Justice Edmund Davis arrive in his robes. Although none of the accused had been positively identified as being either in the train, on the railway track, or at the farm, The forensic evidence against all of them was overwhelming. Fingerprints, palm prints, traces of yellow paint on shoes, and in the case of the solicitors who acted for them on the purchase of the farm, the conveyancing paperwork, all added up to a conspiracy that was impossible to refute. Despite the array of legal talent which their money had bought, it was difficult for the accused to deny that they had been at Leatherslade Farm when the fingerprints of 7 of them had been found there, or that the house had been used as the headquarters for the raid when mail bags and wrappers from the stolen money were left lying around. Against all the odds, John Daly was discharged. The judge said that the prosecution hadn't proved that his fingerprints on various movable objects were made at the farm. After 48 days of the trial, which was unique in British criminal history for its size and complexity, Mr. Justice Davis arrived to hear the jury find all the remaining defendants guilty. Then he passed his sentences, and very harsh they were. Bill Bowl, the oldest of the defendants at 50, who may not have been on the robbery but was caught helping his pal Gordon Goody, 24 years in jail, later reduced to 14 years. Charlie Wilson, one of the moving spirits of the plot who raised the money to make it happen, 30 years. Tommy Wisby, leader of the gang of small-time train robbers which was recruited to help because of their experience with mail trains, 30 years. Jim Hussey, key strongman in the loading of the truck with the money, 30 years. Lenny Field, who acted as a front for the purchase of Leatherslade Farm, 24 years, later reduced to 5. Gordon Goody, a professional thief who led the assault on the engine, got 30 years. John Wheater, the solicitor who arranged the purchase of Leatherslade Farm, got only 3 years because of his war record. Brian Field, his law clerk who introduced him to the gang and did the conveyancing, 24 years. Bob Welsh, one of the heavies, recruited for his strength, 30 years. Roy James, who cut the telephone wires by the track and helped Cordray fix a signal and uncouple the coaches, 30 years. Ronnie Biggs, the minder assigned to the driver he found for the gang, who was never identified, 30 years. Roger Cordray, who changed the signal from green to red with a glove, and the only one to plead guilty, 14 years, paroled after 7. That left, still on the run, Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind of the operation, who marked his rank by dressing up as a major for it. Buster Edwards, another of the originators of the robbery. And Jimmy White, ex-paratrooper in charge of supplies and the truck, and who painted it yellow after the robbery to try to pass it off as belonging to a brick company. As the Black Maria took the 12 who had been sentenced to 12 separate prisons, they were already plotting how they could escape. Within 18 months, 2 of them had done so. Ronnie Biggs had got away from Wandsworth. And Charlie Wilson from Winson Green. 3 years later, Wilson was tracked down in Canada by Tommy Butler and rearrested. He had gone first to France and then to Mexico. On the 10th of April, 1966, Jimmy White was finally arrested in Dover. He got 18 years. Then Buster Edwards, who had found life on the run in Germany and Mexico boring and expensive, gave himself up. He received 15 years. Finally, it was the turn of Bruce Reynolds, who more than anyone else had been the leader of the great train robbers. He was arrested in Torquay on the 8th of November 1968. He had been to France, Mexico and Canada, but was now back in business in Britain. Reynolds coughed up the last £5,000 of the 90,000 that had been his share, but still got 25 years. This left just escapee Ronnie Biggs, who managed first to get to Australia and then to Rio de Janeiro. The least important train robber turned into a comedian, laughing at attempts to capture him. Biggs was followed to Rio by Chief Superintendent Slipper of Scotland Yard. He managed to get him arrested by the authorities pending extradition.
With me, and we entered the apartment, and Biggs was sitting just in a pair of trunks on the floor with his legs crossed, and I think he immediately recognized me because I saw his mouth drop.
But under Brazilian law, a jubilant Biggs had to be released when his girlfriend, Raymunda Castro, turned out to be pregnant. Another attempt was made by adventurers who chartered a yacht in the British colony of Antigua and coaxed him aboard. But when they got him to Bermuda and attempted to claim their reward, the kidnapping founded on similar legal grounds, and this time the Black Maria took him to freedom.